Hey fellow tamers and Digi-Destined, it's Mike AKA Synaku from Overground, and welcome back to the channel. This video was meant to come out a little bit earlier, but just with life happening in the way, unfortunately got a little bit delayed. So as a result, what you're going to see today is unfortunately going to be a victim of the ban list that just dropped earlier this morning. And a few of the decks, well, every single deck on this list includes Ice Wall in some capacity. Obviously now we're going to have to change that because Ice Wall is going to 1, but the purpose of this video is to show you 3 strong blue decks that can carry you over into the national season post EX-1. And at that time period, Ice Wall will still be at 4, it'll still be legal in max capacity, and it'll be after Nats that it actually goes to 1. So the purpose of this video is still technically intact for all intents and purposes, but the theory behind the video and the theory behind these decks will obviously have to change as we adapt to the new Forbidden Limited list that Digimon just implemented earlier today. So let's go ahead and get into the video. So what are we talking about today? If you clicked on the thumbnail and saw the title, this is titled After the Rainbow. And what we do on this channel at Overground is that we usually do what's called a Rainbow series every time a new core set is released. And while EX-1 technically isn't a core set, is a side set, is an extra set, is indicated by the EX moniker, it is something that I want to talk about. I'm not going to go into detail on every single color that would get a deck boost out of this set specifically, but I did want to talk about blue specifically and 3 strong blue decks that I feel that the EX-1 cards will bolster. So let's go ahead and look at the 3 that I have on the docket today. And the first one you're going to see here is it's actually going to be a Gabu Bond list. Alright, so here we have it on screen. And let's go ahead and talk about card by card. And we'll talk about why this deck looks like this the way it does post the EX-1 release, and the theory behind it. So there's many kind of iterations of Gabu Bond that you can see right now. Primarily, there are 3, I guess. There's going to be the Ancient Gurumon variant, there's going to be the Pepsi variant, which includes the red card, something like Delicate Plan, as well as Lightning Joust to give you stronger, aggressive pushes. And then there's also the pure variant. Right now, I feel that post EX-1, Ancient Gurumon becomes the strongest variant, and that is primarily due to Analog Youth. And if you're unfamiliar with Analog Youth, I'm just going to throw it up on the screen real quick. You can take a quick look at it. The long and short of it is that it acts kind of as a pseudo generic memory boost because it searches you for any Digimon, and after looking at the top 3, and then you trash the rest. But the most important part of it is that it has an alterns effect, where if one of your level 5 or higher Digimon is deleted, and it has to have evolution cards in the stack as well, you can suspend him, you gain 1 memory, and then you hatch a Digi-Egg if your breeding area is empty. Kind of similar to how the old green BT1 Mimi did, for example. And the reason this is important is due to how mechanically end-of-turn effects work in the Digimon card game. And the way end-of-turn effects work is that once you've passed the memory gauge over 0 to your opponent's side, you resolve all effects, and then once everything has officially resolved and been finalized and everything, then the opponent will start their turn with whatever memory you've presented them with on the memory gauge. And Analog Youth allows you to kind of play with that spectrum and kind of manipulate the end of turn in a way where it's not actually the end of the turn. And in both cases of both Ancient Gurumon and Gabumon Bond of Friendship, they both have clauses where at the end of the turn, they destroy themselves. And they happen to be level 5 or higher Digimon that would have to have evolution sources underneath them to meet that requirement. And that would trigger Analog Youth. And if you look over here to the deck, we're also playing 4 copies of Ice Wall, and this is going to be very important when discussing the theory of this deck overall. So let's talk about the rest of the deck, and then we'll kind of bring it all together as a whole. So we're playing many copies of Gabumon. We're playing 3 copies of the BT1 Draw 1 Gabumon. We're playing 4 copies of the BT6 Gabumon that lets you get the extra swing. And we're playing 4 copies of the new EX-1 Gabumon, as well as 3 copies of the starter deck Gabumon. So let's talk about one of the newest introductions of the EX-1 set, and this is the EX-1 Gabumon. And this is the inheritable that, when attacking, once per turn, we revealed the top cards of our deck, and we add 1 Tamer card or 1 Digimon card with Gabumon in its name among them and add them to our hand. So this is now a new layer of consistency that both help us find our Davis and our Mats faster, or even our analog youth in that respect, because it is also a Tamer, but also gets more Gabumons into our hand because we can search our deck for any Gabumon. It also includes anything with Gabumon in its name, so it actually lets us fish deeper to get Bond of Friendship itself. And this is a very strong addition, and because we're constantly going to be evolving over this Gabumon to get into our bigger warp states, we're always going to be triggering this to keep digging through our deck and kind of gaining more and more advantage. And then we're rounding out our rookie lineup with 2 copies of Strabumon, again, just to give us extra search power, and 2 copies of Madoki Betamon. This Strabumon can be replaced with copies of the new promo Gabumon that lets you look at the top 5 and search for a Tamer. I do like that in this list, especially because it can search you your analog youths. It doesn't specify blue Tamer, but because we're playing so many hybrids in this list, there is an argument to still stay with Strabumon because he can help you dig for other combo pieces. So again, as you can tell, this is the Ancient Garurumon variant. So with that, we're playing an extra amount of hybrids. On top of the 3 Lobomon that we're playing to end the game out, we're also playing 2 copies of Kendo Garurumon, which is somewhat standard in various Bond of Friendship lists. Some play it, some people opt not to. We're playing it in this capacity so we can constantly get extra value and advantage off of our Ancient Garurumons. But we're also playing 4 copies of the promo Lobomon. And this is the one where when Digivolving, we can evolve into Ancient Garurumon for a cost of 1. So he costs 2 to Digivolve, and Ancient Garurumon would then put us at 3. And then theoretically, if we're starting our turn with 3 with Davis, this entire combo would put us to 0. And that's going to be important as we talk about Ice Wall. And then rounding out the deck, we're playing 4 copies of the Bond of Friendship as well. So, Ice Wall, what does it do? Well, for 1 cost, all of our opponent's Digimon on the next turn get the following effect. When they attack, they lose 2 memory. And when this is checked in security, it basically has the same effect of something like Hammer Spark, for example, where we actually gain 2 memory. So this is very strong to hit in security because it essentially ends our opponent's turn or shortens their turn, depending on where they are on the memory gauge. But in terms of a defensive option, Ice Wall is basically the replacement for any need for blockers or anything like Howling Memory Boost in this deck, because it forces your opponent into a situation where they don't have very many opportunities to attack, depending on how much memory they have or how much memory you can actually give them. And due to the fact that, especially like in the Bond mirror, for example, you would go to 3 with Davis, and then you would go to 4 plus, depending on how many mats and or ties you have in play. You have to pay 3 to go into the Bond in the first place, which means you only have that 1 to 2 wiggle room as well. And if you have Ice Wall active, that means 1 swing from a Bond will automatically put them to 0, and if they have an additional swing, that has to end their turn. But the reason Ice Wall is very important in this deck, A, is a defensive option, but because it costs 1. And I mentioned earlier that sometimes 3 is the sweet spot for a deck like this because you're going to be paying 3 pretty much at all times. For example, let's take the Ancient Garurumon. Let's say that we have a Davis in play. Let's say we don't have any mats just yet, but we have Davis. We promote any of our rookies. We're going to evolve them for 2 into the promo Lobomon. We're then going to pay 1 to evolve into Ancient Garurumon. We're going to attack twice with our Ancient Garurumon, get that early aggression in there. That means we're at 0 because we paid 3 total. And for the sake of this argument, we're also going to assume that we have an analog youth in play. We pay 1 for Ice Wall. That ends our turn, theoretically, once Ice Wall resolves. But now we have to resolve the Ancient Garurumon trigger because the promo Lobomon dictates that the Digimon that Digivolved using this effect is destroyed at the end of the turn. Right? Are you following me so far? So we put our opponent to 1, our turn is about to end, Ancient Garurumon is destroyed, he meets the requirements for Analog Boy, we're going to trigger our Analog Boy, we're going to suspend him, we're going to gain 1 memory that puts us back to 0, and we're going to hatch another Digi-Egg. What does this mean? Well, that means that our turn technically hasn't ended yet, and the effect of Ice Wall is still active onto the opponent's turn already. And by hatching a new Digi-Egg after the one that we just promoted, we can evolve it into another Gabumon or anything else and threaten another aggressive play for the following turn. So, Analog Youth essentially allows us to constantly keep a stream of attackers running, and that's why the ancient Garurumon version of this deck is so much stronger with Analog Youth. It means that we're constantly threatening either an ancient Garurumon or a Bond every single turn, so we can constantly get upwards of 2 or more swings every single turn against the opponent's security. And if you have a Bond in play, that also means that you're threatening extra removal because you can bottom deck any level 5 or lower every single turn. And that's why I believe that this deck is very, 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 very strong. And then to round it off, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Kikaitis Breath. This is mostly for something like the Mirror as well, so you can bounce back opponent's large Digimon, or something that has like a Craniumon, for example, that you just need to get rid of, or like a Jesmon match, for example, where you just need to get rid of the Jesmon because it's generating too much value. This is just kind of a big panic button if your opponent has a big Digimon that you need to deal with. And then we're playing our remaining Tamers, which is going to be 3 Davis and 4 Matt. Now, let's say we have a Matt in play as well, along with our Davis, and we promote a Gabumon. Well, our Matt's going to put us to 4. We're going to draw an additional card. Let's say we decide to go into our Bond of Friendship for 3. That's going to put us to 1. We're going to get our how many checks we get with our Bond, and then to end our turn, we're going to play a copy of Analog Youth. We're going to pay 2. We're going to go from 1 to our opponent's side of the memory gauge, which they are at now 1 as well. Same event is going to happen. The end of turn trigger of Gabumon Bond of Friendship will resolve because of Matt, and it'll destroy itself at the end phase of that turn. Analog Youth will trigger. We'll be able to hatch a new egg, put ourselves back to 0. Our turn now continues. We have another free egg to evolve over top of, and we can do the same thing over and over again. So this deck is projected to be very, very aggressive and very, very consistent because you're literally going to be able to just loop the exact same plays turn after turn and constantly put an insane amount of pressure on the opponent. So this is probably one of my favorite picks of a post EX-1 deck going into Nationals format, and I highly believe that this is going to be a very, very, very strong contender because you have the aggression comboed with the stall/control potential that Ice Wall represents. Let's move on to the next deck that is going to be one of my favorite blue decks for the EX-1 meta, and that's going to be Hexeblaumon. Now, Hexeblaumon got a bunch of new tools with the new Gomamon line introduced in the EX-1. And while we're not playing the entire line, we are playing a few new cards as well. So let's go through the card by card here for the Hexeblaumon list, and I'll explain why some new additions from EX-1 were also put in here. So for the babies, we're playing 1 copy of Upamon and 4 copies of Kyarumon, pretty standard for an Hexeblaumon list. Our rookies, we're playing 4 copies of Blucomon and 4 copies of Gomamon. These are the same inheritable, where if we trash a Digivolution source, we're going to gain 1 memory. And now we're playing 4 copies of Gizamon. This is when we have a opponent's Digimon to play with no Digivolution cards, we get plus 2000 DP. And this is going to be relevant when we go through the rest of the list. And to round that off, we're playing 2 copies of Madoki Betamon. This is primarily here, just like it was in the previous list, to counterplay any ice walls that you would run into in security that could potentially end your turn, or anything like Hammer Spark as well. Our champion lineup's a little bit different than what we're used to. We're actually playing 4 copies of Dolphmon. This is an old card from 1.0 that you probably don't even know existed, except if you're Ice Barrier, because he's been on this card forever. But Dolphmon, similar to Gizamon, reads that while your opponent has no Digimon with no Digivolution cards in play, this Digimon gains plus 1000. So it's just another way to constantly buff up your top end. We're rounding off our champions with 3 copies of Gorlamon, 2 copies of Lobomon, 2 copies of Grizzlymon. Now for our ultimates, we're playing 4 copies of Belchmon. This is, it's pretty standard that you'd come to know and love from any traditional Hexeblaumon list. And we're playing 3 copies of Majiramon. And finally, we're playing 2 copies of the new EX-1 Zudomon. This is one of the first of the new EX-1 introductions that we're going to be playing in a Hexeblaumon list. And if you're unfamiliar with the Zudomon, this is what he does. On Digivolution, we get to trash 1 Digivolution card from the bottom of our opponent's Digimon. But the cool thing about Zudomon is that during our turn, he has the ability to attack opponent's unsuspended Digimon with no Digivolution cards. And this is why we're playing stuff like Gizamon and Dolphmon, because these combined actually give our Zudomon, if he's under a stack that contains both of them, 11,000 DP on a level 5 that can actually attack opponent's unsuspended Digimon if they have no evolution sources. And between his own effect and any other effect that we use to trash, comboed with something like Sora Joe, for example, this actually gives us a lot of potential to start clearing out our opponent's boards preemptively. So moving on to our level 6s, as always, we're playing 4 copies of Hexeblaumon, he requires really no introduction. You should know what he does at this point now. And then we're playing now just one copy of Azulangmon because we're not interested now in that OTK potential, but we still want to have that in our back pocket if it comes up. And when we come with that with both Dolphmon and Gizamon, we can make our Azulangmon relatively strong DP-wise that can help just shred through our opponent's security. But the new main partner that we're going to be pairing Hexeblaumon with now is the new EX-1 Plesiomon. And Plesiomon reads, once per turn, when one of our opponent's Digivolution cards is trashed, we actually get to draw 2. And Plesiomon, just like Zunamon, has the same stipulation that we can attack our opponent's unsuspended Digimon with no Digivolution cards. Now, if you're following the math again, Gizamon plus Dolphmon is a plus 3,000 boost, which means we can actually make Plesiomon 14,000, and that's going to surpass his original 11,000 threshold. That means that on our turn, this allows us to take out tremendous amount of level 6s that our opponent might have that are just kind of standing by. But it also gives us the potential to go through anything that's under a level 6 with absolute impunity. That means we can go after Digimon that our opponent might be planning to build up to use for a lethal push. We can go after Digimon that our opponent might be planning to use to build up into a taller stack. Having the Plesiomon around and having that ability combined with the Zunamon to attack unsuspended Digimon without sources, when we're actively removing sources every single turn, allows us to kind of keep tabs on our opponent and make sure that we can, control the game plan and make sure that we can take away whatever options that they have in terms of throwing attacks back at us. So to round out the list, we're playing 2 copies of the Blitz Omnimon, playing 2 copies of Absolute Blast, and 2 copies of Blue Memory Boost. Between Blue Memory Boost, your Kiaramons, and your Plesiomons drawing you extra cards, this deck is actually incredibly consistent because you're going to be seeing your combo pieces very, very, very quickly and very often. And we're finally playing the 3 tamers, which is just the Sora and Joe dual tamer. Space in this deck is very tight, unfortunately. I would have loved to include something like Ice Wall, ironically, which, is one of the big things that I've been preaching throughout this entire video so far. But I think that Ice Wall kind of detracts from the purpose of this deck because this is meant to be more of a stun deck. And with Hexeblaumon, your opponent's not really going to be having an opportunity to attack you anyway, so Ice Wall kind of felt a little counterintuitive in this list. So yeah, let's move on to the final blue list that we're going to be discussing today, and that is going to be Imperialdramon. Fans of the channel, longtime watchers will know that Imperialdramon is one of the decks that's near and dear to my heart, and I absolutely love the archetype. I'm constantly going back to it with every opportunity I can. I took a bit of a break between BT4 and BT5. I've been turning around a little bit with BT6, but I've been kind of waiting because I knew this was coming down the pipe. So let's talk about Imperialdramon and where it stands in the format in terms of post EX-1 and going into Nationals. A quick discussion here on the Hexeblaumon list. This was built under the pretense that we're going to see a lot of Jessmon representation, especially now with the new ban list that came into effect with Savior Huck going to 1. A lot of people might try to get their last hurrah with Jessmon on a competitive level, in the most competitive event of the season, which would be Nationals, and Hexeblaumon just absolutely shits on Jessmon. It's one of the best matchups it has. It makes all the Sistermons absolutely useless. By taking away all the sources from Jessmon, you just have this neutered shell of a Digimon that literally cannot do anything to advance its game plan or advance its win condition. And because the Sistermons don't have an option to evolve, they just sit there on the board completely useless, and Hexeblaumon just completely gobbles them up. So, just a quick aside on based on where this deck sits in terms of national competency, let's say. So let's go back to Imperialdramon real quick. So now where does Imperialdramon sit in terms of national competency? Well, it's another aggressive deck, but it's not aggressive in the same sense that Gabubond Bond of Friendship or any other Bond deck would be in general. It's very much I akin this to Protect the Castle deck, where you have one main general stack, and that is going to be where you're going to prioritize all of your resources. But the cool thing with Imperialdramon now is that instead of having to choose between a jamming or a piercing variant, you can actually kind of meld them together. And this is probably going to be the deck that has the most new EX-1 cards in it, and that actually received the most EX-1 archetypal support. So let's go through this list and discuss the theory that we've built based on the new cards that have been added into the card pool. So with our eggs here, we're playing 4 copies of the BT3 Demi-Vmon. This is where if we're attacking with jamming, we get to draw a card, and then we're going to round out with the starter deck Vmon, where if we have 8 or more cards in hand, we're going to gain 1000 DP. DP gain is largely irrelevant in this deck specifically because we're aiming to give every single one of our Digimon jamming in some capacity. However, the DP gain is going to be coming up in terms of how we're going to be taking advantage of the built-in piercing mechanic that we're going to be getting as we go through the rest of the deck. We have a lot of draw power, thankfully, which is going to be really strong because this helps us kind of get into our combo pieces a lot faster. And to complement the Demi Vmon with the draw power with the jamming, we're also going to play the BT2 Vmon, whereas this one, if we become unsuspended, we get to draw a card. You'll notice a trend where there's a lot more unsuspending in this deck versus, Imperialdramon of old. Before, the only way to unsuspend consistently was with Imperialdramon himself, as well as the one BT3X Vmon. Now we have a lot more opportunity to do so as we go up the chain. And then we're playing 4 copies of the jamming Vmon himself, old reliable. We're playing 4 copies of the new EX-1 Vmon, similar to the BT2 Vmon. This has a trigger when we unsuspend. In this case, we're going to gain 1 memory. And then to round out the deck with our rookies, we're playing again 2 copies of Madoki Betamon, just to help mitigate any memory shenanigans that our opponent might be using against us. In our champion lineup, we're playing 2 copies of Lobomon. This will help us close out games a little bit faster. And then our next champion lineup, we're actually playing a whole suite of new EX-1 cards. And that includes the new EX-1X Vmon. This is a Digimon that has jamming at the champion level, but it also has the cool inheritable where if the Digimon is named Imperialdramon or if it has free in its traits, it also gains jamming. So, old Imperialdramon enthusiasts would know that, back in this slot, we would play something like Frigimon, for example. Now we have Frigimon that also gives jamming as an inheritable, which is actually super amazing and strong. And to complement that, there's also the new EX-1 Stingmon, which is the complete flip side and mirrors the Dino B counterpart that we used to play at the level 5 slot. And he has piercing on the level 4, and in this case, the inheritable would also give someone named Imperialdramon or someone with a free typing piercing. And as we come to our level 5s and above, every single thing that remains in the deck outside of Omnimon is a free type or is going to be named Imperialdramon. So we will always be able to take advantage of either one of these inheritables depending on how we decide to build the stack. And this is where it gets kind of cool because instead of having to rely on Dino Bmon like we used to, we can actually just play a full suite of Pyldramons and just evolve them over whichever level 4 kind of suits the situation the best. So going to our level 5s, we got the original OG Pyldramon. This is the one with jamming, and that if the inheritable where if our name is Imperialdramon, we get to unsuspend it. And now we have the new Pyldramon from EX-1, and this one actually says that on Digivolving, if a card with free in its traits is into this Digimon's Digivolution sources, unsuspend this Digimon. So now we actually have an opportunity to get a bonus swing with a Pyldramon if we evolve it over level 4, or instead we can actually stand our Pyldramon over a suspended level 4 to protect it from being attacked on the next turn by your opponent on the crackback. And this ability is generally going to be coming into play because outside of Madoki Betamon and Lobomon, every single other card in the deck that would be below it in terms of Digivolution sources are all free types, so this should generally trigger without any fail. And now, it also has a new inheritable where if this Digimon is named Imperialdramon, it cannot be blocked. And that's going to be important when we tie into the whole piercing side strategy as well. Moving on to level 6, our original OG jamming Imperialdramon has actually been reduced in favor of a new contender that was introduced in EX-1. So this Imperialdramon, if you're unfamiliar, which you shouldn't really be by now, it's a 5 cost to evolve, but if you're evolving it over a Pyldramon or a Dino Bmon, you reduce the cost by 2, it becomes a 3 cost to evolve. And on evolution, we get to unsuspend every single one of our Digimon with jamming. But now, we're introducing the new Dragon Mode that was introduced in EX-1. And this one has, when Digivolving, if a card with free in its traits, this Digimon becomes unsuspended, and we can actually suspend one of our opponent's Digimon as well. So similar to the original Imperialdramon, the Imperialdramon archetype is all about making multiple attacks with the same stack and getting as much value out of one single stack as possible, while that single stack will generally have jamming and will generally survive. But the other cool thing about this Imperialdramon is that for each color in its Digivolution sources, it gains 1000 DP. So because we're also playing green in combination with the blue cards, that means that we're going to be always getting at least 2000 DP if we've built the stack with a Stingmon. And because this gives us the opportunity to suspend one of our opponent's Digimon as well, if we decide to build our stack with Stingmon instead, we actually will give this Imperialdramon piercing, so it allows us to clear boards while still continuously doing extra damage. So you can kind of already see where the combos go together. The original combo would be something like build up to a Imperialdramon, swing, start your turn with 3, go into this Imperialdramon, unsuspend. You would attack once, unsuspend it with the Imperialdramon's inheritable, and then you'd be able to attack again, and you would get 3 checks total with 1 single Digimon. And if you had any other jammers on board before that play took place, then you would actually get multiple attacks depending on how you've built up your board. Now, if we look into the sense of how this new Imperialdramon ties with everything together, we can actually swing with this Hexeblaumon, for example, with jamming, evolve into the Imperialdramon instead. It'll get jamming through the inheritable. We can swing again, and then we can evolve into another Imperialdramon to unsuspend it. We'll get 2 checks, and we protect our Digimon from being attacked on the crackback. So you can play Imperialdramon both offensively and defensively based on how you want to keep your stack alive. But generally, you're going to be hitting 3, 4, maybe even 5 checks with a single stack, depending on A, how much memory you have, but B, depending on how you're able to build your stack based on the situation. So the ability to kind of switch between XVmon and Stingmon on a dime, depending on how your opponents build up their board, makes it very strong because you can play this deck aggressively, or you can play this deck as a tempo deck as well. So to round out the deck and complement our Lobomons and finishers, we're also playing 2 copies of Blitz Omnimon, and our options are going to be 3 copies of Ice Wall. This kind of ties into the tempo strategy as well, because we might take a couple turns to get our ultimate setup with Imperialdramon. Ice Wall gives us an opportunity to kind of stay alive by stunning our opponent for maybe a turn or 2, giving us a little bit of a reprieve to kind of get into all of our stuff. And to complement the whole, one-hit wonder strategy, we've also teched in a couple red cards, and that's a Delicate Plan as well as the 2-cost red tie. This will also help us with our DP gain when it comes to us going into the piercing pivot, and a Delicate Plan will ensure that while we do kind of go all in with that 1 stack, we will not be triggering any of our opponent's options. That means we will not be triggering their opposing Ice Walls, but also we're not going to be running into pesky things like Gaia Force, Wyvern's Breath, Ultimate Flare, Iron-Fisted Onslaught, anything that would immediately deal with our stack. Well, we have jamming, and that's cool in terms of surviving security battles. The Delicate Plan makes sure that we will survive absolutely anything that'll be hiding in our opponent's security, except for maybe like a Chikurimon or something like that. But yeah, Delicate Plan really ties the strategy as a whole and makes sure that we can have that extra aggression go through as safely as possible. And to round out the deck, we're just playing 3 copies of Davis. This is to ensure that we can put ourselves to 3 every turn, because 3 is kind of the magic number in this deck, and because we're playing Stingmon, that actually gives us extra value in terms of searchability. Davis also exists to be a tamer, so that Lobomon can evolve over and end the game if we ever need to end to that capacity. So yeah, that is it. That is my take on the 3 best blue decks that are going to be coming out of the new EX-1 set, and the 3 best blue decks that I think you should take with you to the National 2021 Finals Championship that's going to be coming up soon in the beginning of February. If you have any questions about any of the decks that were listed today, please feel free to leave a comment on this video below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If you like what we do here at Overground, please consider giving this channel a subscription and giving the video a like as well, so we know which content is reaching you. I have been Mike, aka Synaku, once again. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you all in the next one.